Welcome back to South Africa tonight here on ENCA. Well, they say that even when you leave South Africa, your heart still stays in Mzansi. Well, this is definitely the case with Doctor Patrick Soon-Shiong. The Biotech billionaire has pledged 3 billion rand to invest in bolstering biotechnology and producing COVID-19 vaccines here in South Africa. Soon-Shiong's vision is to produce his own vaccine, which has a different approach to fighting the coronavirus in the country. Born in South Africa to Chinese parents, he studied medicine here and then went to the United States. He became a transplant surgeon and researcher for NASA, but that wasn't enough. Dr. Soon-Shiong then invented a drug that has great results in fighting certain forms of cancer, and now he owns the LA Times and has a stake in the LA Lakers. Well, to tell us more about his fascinating life and his major investment in South Africa, we're joined by the man himself, Dr. Patrick Soon-Shiong, the CEO and founder of Nantworks and executive chairman of Immunity Bio. Doctor, thank you so much for your time. Good morning to you. It's a weekend and you are having your cup of coffee with us here in SA. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me.
Well, your schedule probably ranks up there with some of the busiest people in the world. And in every article that I've researched and read about you, Doctor, you speak so clearly about how your past and growing up in South Africa during apartheid has influenced many of the decisions you made in your life, even now. So tell us a little bit about your childhood in apartheid, South Africa.
Well, I grew up in Port Elizabeth, which is now called, I'm going to say it, Quebeca.
Very good.
I think I'm pronouncing it properly. But look, it has formed me because, you know, you learn to be self-sufficient. You learn to have a community where you organize together to do the right thing for everybody else. And the beauty was I was able to get amazing education and then increase that technology background by coming to this country. And now the idea for me to come back home. So, yeah, I mean, Port Elizabeth is an industrial town, as you know. And I trained in Baragwanath, where the suffering and the kwashiorkor and the diseases that don't affect Western worlds are so rampant. I finished my training at Johannesburg General Hospital as the first Chinese to be in a white hospital, and then left to work in the TB clinics in East London and Port Elizabeth. So that's formed a lot of what I do and how I think and how I believe that we on this planet to sort of help as a physician and a scientist and a clinician others, and the opportunity has now risen for me to do that.
Doctor, you were, in one of your interviews, you said that when you were first doing your internship, I think it was, at a TB clinic or on a patient with TB, that patient refused to be seen by you.
Well, no, it was actually at Johannesburg General Hospital. Professor Bothwell was the first intern, Chinese intern, to be allowed into the training under Professor Bothwell, who is an icon, as you may know, at the Johannesburg General Hospital in the cancer ward. And the first patient there, who was a cancer patient, said I couldn't touch him, I shouldn't touch him. And Professor Bothwell came with me and said, if you don't, you have to leave the hospital. So I examined the patient and diagnosed the cause of his infection, which had eluded the diagnosis for 3 weeks. And he was very grateful and walked around the entire hospital and said, that Chinese doctor, he didn't say the word Chinese doctor, but I'm not going to repeat what he did say, you should have him examine you. So, you know, that began my journey in that hospital.
What informed your decision to leave South Africa?
Well, all my friends had taken the amnesty of the United States. Around that time, the United States had given amnesty to South African and English doctors to avoid having to write the American exam, and because of a shortage. And they all left on this charter plane. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. My obligation was to give back to South Africa. So I went into the TB clinics in East London and discovered that as I was injecting the patients, poor kids in wrought iron beds, that was very little that I knew what I was doing. There was no resources, no x-rays, no anything. And I thought, I now have to leave so that I could come back with technology so I can make the right diagnosis for these kids and these people, which is really our people, and promised myself 5 years, and it's a little late now, it's 25 years, but I'm ready to come back.
You go to Canada first and then the US, the so-called land of the free. That must have been a major shift coming from South Africa.
It was, coming to Canada, the first thing I saw was snow, and as you know, we don't see snow in South Africa. I then had an opportunity to work in the Canadian hospital and was recruited to UCLA, which was one of the most fortunate opportunities of my life, and became an asset scientist, a UCLA surgical resident. And you're right, it is the land of the free, in the sense that you're allowed to dream your dream. You're allowed to think outside the box. I became an asset scientist. I developed nanotechnology. And then I built an organization so that we could actually scale something that had never been built in the world called a nanoparticle. So that is the land of the free, but it isn't as free as one really think with regard to racial injustice and apartheid, so to speak. In South Africa, we understood apartheid because we saw it, we touched it, felt it, it was clear. Sadly, I think there is still an unrecognized racial bias, whether in this country or anywhere other parts of the world. So, but it gave me the opportunity to build, dream, and implement what I think now I can bring home.
Take us through your astonishing career from surgeon to creating that amazing miracle cancer drug, Abraxane.
Well, look, again, because of South Africa, think about it. We went from high school to medical school in South Africa. And I was all of 23 years old when I came to Canada and then United States. So by the time I came here and became an assistant professor of surgery, I was younger by maybe 5 or 6 years, and even the chief residents. So that allowed me to have a real freedom to do research as well as pioneer what I thought was pioneering operations. And I trained to do a whole organ pancreas transplant in cancer, in diabetic patients. And at the same time, I was doing these major cancer operations called Whipples for pancreatic cancer. And I realized on the one hand, I'm treating patients in which I'm trying to prevent the organ from rejecting. On the other hand, I've got cancer patients in which I want to kill that organ or that cancer. And it dawned on me that this entire universal system is the immune system. So on that basis, I started really going deep into what makes our immune system work. Why do we not get cancer? Why do we reject an organ? And that put me on this path where I am today for both COVID and for cancer. And I think COVID is cancer.
That's so interesting. I mean, what were your first thoughts when you heard about COVID-19? Did you think 18 months ago that we would be where we are now?
Sadly, I did. And I, in fact, shared this with the US government at that time. We were at the throes of treating cancer patients with our adeno vaccine. With the National Cancer Institute, in which I'd done already about probably 100 patients 5 years before COVID using our adenovirus vector. And what was very apparent to me was the T cells, that your body has T cells, and if you can activate T cells that are specific just for the COVID cell or for the cancer cell, it kills that infected cell. The importance of that is you get rid of the factory. And unless you get rid of the factory, you're really not going to stop this pandemic. So when COVID hit in 2020, and ironically, it was exactly around the time when Kobe had this tragic accident. And I was involved with both that sad time and my team was looking at this COVID, and we said, we must use everything we've done in cancer to attack COVID, because just blocking the virus with an antibody vaccine is going to be insufficient. And sadly, as you could see now with the Delta variant, it's true. And just like cancer, this virus would mutate against the antibody. It would use the antibody's bait, so to speak, to really mutate around it and get into the cell and then proliferate. So that means you need to kill the factory, you need to kill that cell. So you need not just antibodies, you also need T cells to kill it. And our platform was exactly that. Unfortunately, the world of vaccinology is all about antibodies, 40 years of antibodies. You give yourself a flu shot every year. And it was an uphill struggle, very much like what I'm doing in cancer, where I don't want high-dose chemotherapy. So we've taken a completely different approach, where we have a vaccine that generates T cells specifically and then generates antibodies specifically. And I'm excited to say that universal boost vaccine is about to come into South Africa very soon.
Please tell us more about that, because that really does lead me to my next question, and one of the reasons we're so excited to have you on the show tonight.
Well, if you look at the variant, and now there's a Delta Plus, and South Africa had, again, the insight, unlike other countries in the world, to do the genomic sequencing, and credit to Tulio de Oliveira, and his team, who really did that work. And we then collaborated with him to show that, in fact, the first variant, which was called the 484 variant, actually changed the structure of the virus so the antibodies couldn't recognize it. This is what we call conformational change. And we said, oh my God, yeah, it's beginning. And that was the Beta variant, the South African variant, or UK variant, and the Brazilian variant, and then the Delta variant. Now, all these variants are just changes of the spike protein that allow the virus to get into the cell. What it can't really change is the innards of the virus, which is this nucleic capsid. It needs that innards of the virus in order to replicate. So we can kill the cell that was infected and prevent replication. You can prevent transmission, and you prevent, hopefully, the long-term effects. What was exciting to me was in 2003, there was a SARS-CoV-1 outbreak, and people that got infected had a T cell memory for 17 years. So I'm so desperate for us to now launch. We are already in phase 1 in the United States, but as an organization, we can only limit our resources to one country or the other, and I chose South Africa so we can come into the heart of the storm, and also not only do that, but bring the capacity to manufacture the product in South Africa so that everything could be self-sufficient. So to cut a long story short, we have a vaccine that goes after both the outside of the virus and the innards of the virus, that generates both antibodies and T cells. And hopefully we block the virus from entering. And if it does enter, we kill the infected cell so it can't reproduce.
I believe work is already being done in South Africa on this new type of vaccine. Whereabouts and how far ahead are you? How far along are you?
Well, I'm so pleased. I've been working very closely with SAFRA, and they've been incredibly responsive. And Glenda Gray at the Medical Research Council, Shabir Mahdi at WITS, and Linda Gale Beckett and Graham Heinkes at Kaliche and University of Cape Town. So we're working with the top scientific and medical institutions, and then tying that to very rigorous regulatory strategy, because I think it's really important that these done in the controlled, regulatory, defined conditions. And SAFRA has now given us green light to go to all the way to phase 3, phase 1, 2, and 3, is what we call the Sisonke Boost trial. So we'll be taking these healthcare workers that have received the Johnson & Johnson single shot and giving a group our boost, and comparing those boost versus no boost. And I would predict that we would significantly reduce breakthrough infections. That's a prediction, obviously, but that's what we've seen in our preclinical work in our non-human primate studies. I'm then submitting another trial, and we can call that the TEMBA trial. And really, the TEMBA trial is to take, for the first time, an mRNA vaccine, combine that with a DNA vaccine. So an mRNA vaccine as the first shot to give you the maximum amount of antibodies, the DNA vaccine to give you the maximum amount of T cells as your second jab. And I'm anxious to start that trial. We're ready. We could actually bring that trial to bear within weeks. And if that works, my goal is to have 50 million doses produced in South Africa within 12 months.
Unbelievable. And I mean, we just really hope that that happens. Just on a more personal level, you know, you're now with the LA Times, you've invested heavily in what seemed to be a dying fourth estate. Why the interest in the LA Times and newspapers?
Well, look, again, South Africa formed that, right? I don't know if you remember the Evening Post and the Herald in Port Elizabeth, but I would run every day to the Evening Post printing press, and the newspapers kept us alive. The newspapers actually educated me partly. The newspapers kept, you know, the call to power and really the idea of how you can have a voice against for the rights of the community. So, you know, look, we're fortunate to have the resources to try and save this paper, the LA Times, which is an iconic, important paper for all of California and the nation, and in fact, the nation. So when the opportunity came, we took it. But I think the opportunity is also for us to make this a whole media platform. And, you know, we just hired Kevin Merida, who came from ESPN and Washington Post. And we're going to make this into a video, media, TV, books, music, podcast platform beyond just the paper.
Just last question. Do you ever sit down and say, wow, I've really made it, and just relax?
No, because we've not made it yet. The purpose of what I do, I think, is not about the amount of money you could make, or, you know, I hate the word billionaire, frankly. It's really about what impact you will have made when you've left this world, right? And I think we're this close about cancer. You know, we now have complete remissions for patients with pancreas cancer, triple-negative breast cancer, bladder cancer. And we're this close, I think, with regard to HIV and COVID, etc. When I say this close, we're this close in terms of scientific understanding. And what I need to do now is implement these theories in a very controlled way. And we're doing this in the United States with 25 phase 2-3 clinical trials in the company I call Immunity Bio. And in South Africa, we'll create this thing called NANS South Africa, where I hope we can implement, but more importantly, implement treatments for patients who really the Western world don't really care about, like cervical cancer, HPV, schistosomiasis, TB, yellow fever, Zika, chikungunya. These are words that, as I said, tropical diseases that are completely nobody's paying attention to because there's really no economic return. But it's not about economic return. It's about really making an impact and actually changing human life where we can.
Well, Doctor...
So the answer is we've not made
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but you know, in South Africa, we love celebrating success, and so we are claiming you as one of our own. And thank you once again for joining us tonight.